and then we'll open it up for general questions and dialogue as a full group the last part of our time together. So let's get started. First, to introduce our moderator, Ilya Tabak. Ilya is one of those entrepreneurs who knows everyone and is involved in everything in Kansas City. One of his most recent endeavors is as an entrepreneur in residence at Black & Veatch, which is one of the biggest engineering companies in the world. He brings an outside-in perspective and bridges markets for the company. Ilya was also a PhD candidate at KU in environmental engineering. He helped organize a blockchain KC conference and was the founder of EdgeUp Sports, which built a new generation of tools that process videos to highlight the importance of medical events from videos. And he has worked for blockchain productivity and SunCrate Energy. So he'll be helping us lead some of our discussion today. And then our special guest is Andres Colombo. He is joining us from Cordoba, Argentina. Andres is a tech entrepreneur and manager of an incubator and at a university that focuses on science and technology projects. Many of the startups that they work with are green technology businesses. And as a researcher, his personal interests include scientific entrepreneurship, building his own business ventures, and helping other science-based startups better understand the business landscape, especially intellectual property rights and protection. So I had the pleasure of meeting Andres last June when he was in Kansas City on an international visitor leadership program on science and technology entrepreneurship. His days took him all over with stops at CERN, the KC Chamber, Sprint Accelerator, Google Fiber, and the alphabet of entrepreneurial support organizations here in KC, the SBTDC, KUCTC, ECJC, and BTBCKU. Just a mouthful of acronyms. We'll see if he wants to comment on his experiences in KC in a bit, but for now, I'm going to hand things off to Ilya.
Thanks, Courtney. I appreciate it, and I'm glad that we were all kind of able to make it. I guess I'd like to start without kind of burying the lead, as they say in journalism. You know, we chatted a little bit before kind of everybody else got on kind of what the situation was like in Argentina, but maybe it'd be good to kind of, you know, talk about that, talk about kind of where you are geographically, and then kind of overall, you know, how has the world changed here in the past 3 months? And that will probably help us contextualize, you know, how has that impacted you personally, entrepreneurial efforts, maybe kind of green tech, you know, and really help set up the conversation, because it's sort of changed our view on a lot of things stateside. And I know that's not isolated to us, unfortunately.
Well, thank you so much for this meeting. As a country, we got into the lockdown earlier, very early. So we had during March only 20 or 25 cases. From that point, we entered the lockdown. So the idea here is to not to create a big turmoil in the health system. So there was a very strict lockdown from the very beginning, and that's well, you know, all the activities were put on halt. We in doing so, overall we could flatten the curve. That is the most used term today. In some way, so far we have only 4,000 cases. The death toll is about 300 people. So it is, we have been successful in doing so. But on the other hand, this as we can see all over the world, this came with an economic downturn. You know, the downsides are all the the same that you are heard about in all the countries. So personally, I entered in lockdown in March. We are still working from home, and and entrepreneurs have suffered from that hardly, you know. For instance, in Latin America, in Argentina, mainly, 2 out of 3 startups had to lay off employees. A lot of startups are reaching the banks for taking some money for credits and so forth. But the government is making great efforts to deliver money to the whole economy. You know, there are a lot of programs, a lot of help. A lot of help programs, a lot of ways in which the government is dealing with that. For us as an incubator, and when as Connie said, we are working with technology entrepreneurs here at the university. We had to change the way in which we are working. The first 2 weeks were very weird in some way because we didn't know how that was going to continue. So we didn't know what to do. But once we used to the lockdown, we started to launch some programs or some activities. First, for avoiding our startups, for stopping the fall of our startups. So in that way, there were a lot of activities related to accessing bank creditors, to accessing mentorship, to turning the startups to the digital world, you know. So how we started to deliver some content related to new platforms, to home office, to financial aids for home equipment, for all the equipment related to home office and so forth.
Yep.
Yes, that is the general landscape.
No, it's helpful.
Yes.
I do have a kind of a bit of a question, maybe to shine a little bit of color. It'd be interesting, kind of what's the culture entrepreneurially kind of generally like? Where does financing come from? How are kind of the initial partnerships? You know, what does it look like, you know, before this? And then kind of, you know, in your dual role, right, kind of leading an accelerator at a university and also being an entrepreneur is kind of a unique perspective here, because in some cases you're a resource partner, and in other cases you're still an entrepreneur. But maybe
Yes.
if you can kind of fill in some of the gaps on what it used to look like and how it's turning, that would be kind of helpful to paint a larger picture.
Well, yes. Before this pandemic, the startup ecosystem was very dependent on the state funds, you know, mainly at the early stage phase. But in our region in particular, there is a thriving private equity ecosystem that obviously is now not working with us. So a lot of startups, the main change that was that a lot of startups had to trust in state funds, you know. So they turned to the they started to ask for help to the state. That was not very common for a startup being accelerated or with some revenues. The state funds were available for early stage startups, but now all the whole ecosystems and all the startups in their different stages are requiring the state helping. So that is the main change. And I think that really we don't know how is going to how the private equity organizations are going to react after this pandemic, because we expect them to resume, to start releasing funds for the startups ecosystem again, but we really don't know because, we have no information about that.
Right.
So, yes. So yes, sorry.
No worries. I guess I'm going to ask a bit of a follow-up on when you say private equity, does that mean kind of capital coming from operating companies? Is it more venture?
Yes.
Because we're seeing many of the same trends on, kind of the capital stack from angel investment to organized venture capital to private equity is in many cases sort of looking at how do we react, what do we do? And there's a lot of active conversations. Curious to see how this is playing out in Argentina.
Yes, well, before the crisis, there was an incipient private equity ecosystem, as I told you, but there were a lot of companies trying to invest in new startups. There is a trend, I think that is a global trend because the way in which companies are fostering innovation is by investing in new startups. So I think that that is going to continue in the near term because for instance, we as university are working along with a lot of private companies, not common investor, but private, not angel investor, but common companies that are looking for new source of investments. So I think that in the future, after this crisis, that is going to be the way in which we can foster the entire ecosystem in which we are going to get funds for new startups by working together with well-established companies. In spite of the crisis, the economy here is characterized by a lot of services. So there are companies here delivering services for the world, so exporting a lot of solutions. So these companies are coping with the pandemic in a better way. So and they are in some way still in contact with us, looking for new startups. So I think that is going to be the main change. We are going to work together more easily with companies, with well-established companies.
Yeah, I found that kind of the entrepreneurial perspective generally is really helpful in just kind of thinking about how do you create value for whom, and sort of, dropping in any situation and sort of looking around what are the pieces and then figuring out how to do something beneficial. Be curious to kind of your thoughts, to kind of following on your comments. Normally when companies come and reach out and kind of look for those connections, that's a pretty strong driving force, but I'd be curious to see kind of if you're seeing the same thing.
Well, yes. Well, you know that new startups have a lot of demands, but I think that in spite of the funds and so forth, I think that what they are more interested in is in new contacts. You know, I work with science-based entrepreneurs, so they in general they sell to other companies. I mean, in general we are working with B2B business models. So what they look for is for prospects, for potential customers. So I think that our role is more focused not only in getting funds, that is very common for all the incubators here, but also in trying to create links with companies. So that is a model that is very interesting for me, because in some way, if we can bring companies in at the very beginning, we can in some way validate our ideas earlier. So that is a good point. So our role, as you know, you can when running an incubator, you start with a portfolio of projects and start look. And the first idea is to work with them in the same way. You know, it's better for it. It would be better. You can think that it will be better that for us to try all the startups the same way, but when you start working with them, you realize that each startup is particular. So you end up doing whatever they need to grow. So it's most of the time is like a craft shop, you know. So you cannot be you cannot spread the same tool for all the startups. So but what I see is that our main role is to create new contacts for startups, to help them to create a network and that is very very. It can sound very weird because, but it's very important for them to be in touch with mentors, with companies. So I think that is the most valuable asset that we can deliver for them.
I don't think it sounds weird at all, right? When you think about how do you create value, you ultimately give something to somebody that's buying something, and they're buying something because it's needed, right? And so those conversations ultimately drive the ability to quickly get there, right? You can have an idea and kind of create your own vision of what you think the world looks like, but that vision is very different when you talk to somebody who you're asking to pay you for something, right?
Yes, I agree. So, yes.
How's that perspective? I'm curious because it seems like you spent quite some time at the university as a resource and kind of in the maybe a lesser period, but still some time in managing the accelerator. How does that change your kind of perspective and career? Because it seems like you're kind of thinking as more of an ecosystem player in many cases on how do you accelerate and connect your kind of technology-based startups with the world, which is maybe a different perspective than I have this idea and I want to get it out into the world.
Well, that is a touchy topic, because I think that is the key for transferring technology and science to the market. So, yes. Well, I'm a chemistry PhD, so I'm coming from the science world, and we at the university have a regional focus, and I really, because we hear all the time that you have to be a global startup, you have to be global, and funds come if you are you are born global and try to sell in foreign markets and so forth. But we we here try to solve problems for the local community, you know. So we foster science, and we foster science entrepreneurship, uh, mainly from a local standpoint. So we are well connected with the local companies that need innovation, that maybe that are selling in foreign markets, but they can enhance their processes and so forth. And we, in some way, as I work with early stage startups, I don't have the mindset for a most wide perspective for the global startup ecosystem. You know, I'm very focused on the local context. So, and I think that is the way in our startup use for growing is focusing first in the local solutions and then try to go in global. So that is our daily job, you know, to work in the local with or trying to solve local problems. I don't know if I that makes sense for you, but I really and that's was the main reason I was struck by the Kansas ecosystem. You know, I really realized that you have a very well connected local ecosystem, so that made sense for me too, and I work every day to translate some experiences to our ecosystem.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you think about it, yeah, geographically, we're about 100 miles from the, center of the continent, right? So that means everything went through us when it was going west and then came back as we were going east. And so it's kind of the heart, if you will, right? Everything ultimately comes through the heart back and out. And so innovation, Courtney kind of pointed out that the Midwest is an innovative region, but the innovation, has many forms, right?
Yes.
And much of the innovation has happened in kind of animal health science. We have a very strong footprint, really from a global perspective on, how do you do animal health and kind of food science regionally. We obviously have kind of a lot of healthcare IT and other things, that we have exported to the world. But there's a lot of kind of interesting and weird collaborations going on, how do you get together to solve a problem? And I think that what's interesting to me is, Kansas City is not unique. There's regions in Germany that have kind of the entire German auto industry is in roughly the same kind of geographical region in Germany as Kansas City is in the US. If you think about it, actually Wuhan is very similar geographically and, both working relationship and kind of where it is in relation to the rest of the population centers as Kansas City, and so I think that I guess just to punctuate your remarks, knowing kind of where you are regionally, geographically, and kind of what some of those problems are, and then understanding how they translate to other similar regions and companies is a really strong kind of focusing energy, right? And also, yes, for scientists, for transferring IP, you have a lot of opportunities to look at what's useful from kind of the technology side that actually makes an impact.
Yes. In some way, yes, because we are far from the capital here. We are the second city in the country, but we are far from Buenos Aires, and there you have a more global perspective. So what we have to do is to be focused on our food industries in our local opportunities.
No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess as you've had now a couple of months to, you said it took you a couple of weeks to figure out what to do. right? as it did probably the rest of the world. And really kind of synthesize all the information that's coming in and figure out what does it mean for us, right? So now that you had kind of a couple months, what's it looking like kind of for you personally, and then kind of for the accelerator and maybe your startup?
Well, yes, it's kind of a design period. You know, we have time to think right now. I'm really I don't know really how this going to evolve in the near term. But for instance, for the university, well, the you know that the education sector was one or is one of the less innovative sector overall. So, but right now it has to build new capacities and to adopt technology. So I think that there is a big opportunity there, because virtual education here in Argentina is not well developed. So and all the universities are now turning their faces to the technology platform and so forth. And I think that also for instance, I'm not using I'm using only electronic money for the last 2 months. So I think that this is going to happen for the next for our next days, and from now on we are going to take into account that we have a very informal economy here. So all people is now turning to the credit cards or to the bank transfers and so forth. So that is going to change for forever here, I think, and that also represents a great opportunity for startups. I think that technology within education and technology within financing, if you can say in a way, yeah, you have there Amazon as a very well-developed platform for delivering stuff. We have here Mercado Libre that is very big, but I think that the economy is going is turning to the online platforms, and these type of companies are going to even grow a lot. So I think that as we can expect, that there are going to be a lot of opportunities in the technology sector, in particular in those for us in those sectors that were not well developed compared with what is happening in the developed countries like yours.
Sure. Yeah. One thing that we've kind of monitored is, there's already kind of touches of this in the world, right? We've been talking about working remotely for probably the better part of 40 years. Companies like IBM and others have been painting a vision of what it means to be remote and all the benefits to society, right? I think in many cases, this has kind of changed the timeline of a lot of those conversations. And at least in the US, if this happened 5 or 10 years ago, I think we would be in a very different place than, it happening in 2020, just from a kind of telecommunications, finance, delivery, all the things you just talked about were in a very different place 5 years ago. And even 2 years ago in some ways. And so it's interesting to kind of look for points.
Yes, I think that, you're not, I'm talking with a lot of university professors, for instance, and they are telling me that it's harder for them to go virtual, and it's very difficult to connect with students. and it's very stressful to have a 3-hour class in a virtual classroom, and they prefer still, in spite that they are young professors, they still prefer the physical or on the presential contact. So that the technology is not going to suppress the way in which we connect with other people, and I think that is great, because you know that innovation is better when you try physically with other people. You know, the home office is not going to completely be in all the companies, and in spite of that, in some companies is going to be possible, but I think that at some point home office is not going to replace the entire workforce landscape, you know. But
Sure.
Yes, people is complaining here, not only because they cannot be outside, but it's psychologically it costs them a lot of effort to connect with people in virtual platform.
So this is really good. This is good. One of the things, as you said, you know, kind of being locked in your house for 2 months is a good kind of design period, and it's allowed you know, me to kind of focus on what's important. You know, how am I prioritizing my time, my life? I think to kind of talk to your comments a little bit. I think there's definitely a lot of challenges, but I think there's also a lot of opportunities, right? I think in many ways the world right now is much flatter than it ever has been, to where, you know, many people are in a similar case to you, right? And very much like we're having a conversation here. I've talked to, in the last 2 weeks, I've talked to somebody on 4 continents, I think, you know, on a fairly regular basis. And it's, you know, because many of them are solving the same problem. Some of it is because, you know, kind of my organizational commitments, things like that. But it's an interesting kind of adjustment. I will also kind of encourage you to think about a lot of those things are harder because you really have to be more intentional about the human relationship, right? If I know you, we trust each other, we work together, right? It's a different thing than if we are new to each other, right? And so being much more intentional about that in the digital space is important, because like if we were in the same space, right, there isn't a delay. I don't have to stop, wait 5 seconds for you to start talking, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of those things that humans just, you know, innately understand are important to be intentional about. But I would, you know, I've been using it as much of an opportunity, both kind of within a larger organization as well as for my own context to think about, look, it's a constraint, but you know, if we can't figure out how to deal with the constraint right now, we're all in bigger trouble anyway.
Yes. Well, I think that I think that an outcome here that we cannot still realize about it, that is the all the things related to the environment, the natural environment. You know, there are a lot of changes that they are not still well studied. You know, there are animals going over there that, or using spaces that they didn't use before the pandemic, but that those outcomes are not well studied still, but they also represent an opportunity for us, because if we can in some way realize about that, realize about the benefits that this pandemic brought to us in environmental terms, we can also make things better in the future, you know. So that is a part that I'm seeing that it's happening all around the world. Still, we have not the perfect idea of what that means. You know, there are a lot of news there about the environment recovering from our human activity. But once we could put all of this together and try to understand better the consequences of our past activities, I think that is going to represent an opportunity for not only for the new startups or economic opportunities, but also for us as human, you know.
No, that makes a lot of sense. In kind of your design period of 2 months here, what have you found to be kind of more important, less important? You know, can you share with us a little bit on kind of in this time of reflection, what seems to be, you know, kind of floating to the top?
Well, I think that I really before this pandemic, I really thought that all the technology was going to cover all the aspects of our lives, and right now I'm realizing that I need to be physically in contact with other people. You know, there is some part of the communication that is casted by the body itself. So and what I realizing right now is that I can spend 5 or 6 hours in Zoom speaking with a lot of communities, a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs, and it's very it costs me a lot. So it's very hard for me psychologically. So, and I think that this lockdown for me has been an opportunity for understand the importance of physical contact with other people. You know.
That makes sense. And yeah, I actually had before kind of the sports tech stuff. So I left my PhD in environmental engineering and started a company focused on how to understand and capture human reaction. And so I actually spent a few years thinking about these questions. And so I appreciate what you're saying on many levels. It's kind of the tradition of the Kansas City startup community normally to say, you know, how can we be helpful? You know, or what we can do to help. So I'll ask it in just kind of the tradition of, you know, the community here, because I think that always opens up kind of a good way to have a conversation. So I just kind of send that over to you, see what you say.
Well, by having this kind of meeting is it's very important for me, really, because I think that as humans, we share a lot of values, a lot of ideas that in spite of knowing that beforehand, I have to connect with people to validate that, to confirm that. But yes, well, I'm particularly for Kansas. What I've seen is that we are a province here that has a strong agricultural industry and the food industry too, and that maybe makes sense for you, because in some way there is a strong industry related to agriculture and dairy there, and maybe that is important because, for instance, last time I was there, I can get in touch. I could get in touch with some people working on those areas, and there are opportunities for us to work with you, not only for you to look for here clients or potential clients, and the same for us, but also at the research level. And also, what is very important, I would like to highlight the fact that you have a very strong ecosystem there that is very well connected. And one of the most important things I brought here to Argentina from Kansas is that, for instance, a lot of initiatives, a lot of activities go beyond the political structure of a certain moment, you know. So a lot of connection between organizations still maintain themselves in spite of the government, in spite of the political context. So that is very important. You know, most of this ecosystem, this thriving ecosystem, I consider Kansas City a thriving technology and innovation ecosystem. Most of these ecosystems are based on trust. You know, there are trustful organizations, and they create this synergy based on the trust on common work that they have done during a lot of years. So I think that this what this the most important thing for me is that to be a witness of the thriving ecosystem. What I try to create here, I'm a very small part of a whole machine of the whole ecosystem here, but we, in spite of us having to create our own economy, our own ecosystem, the importance of networks or of the trust within networks is very useful. It will be very useful for us, you know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's actually good. I have a bunch of other questions, but I think it's a good kind of opportunity to turn it over to Courtney and kind of get some folks to ask questions and have a bit more of a dialogue here.
Yeah, so we're going to open it up for the last 15 minutes. If anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, feel free to unmute yourself and ask those now. Okay, then I'm going to get us started. I'm super curious, how have the local startup communities in Cordoba and Kansas City that you've seen, both for Ilya and Andres, pivoted to address things that are happening with COVID-19, whether it's printing face masks with 3D printers or other innovative ways that entrepreneurs are stepping up?
Yes, well, that is another good outcome from this pandemic, because the social solidarities are arousing all over the country. The startups, for instance, we are working with some startups that are doing 3D printing, that right now are producing masks and a lot of equipment for the medical system. There are some scientists here working on drugs and on tests, all focus on COVID also. So, for instance, science funds from the state and from abroad, from inter-country organizations are also focused only on this virus, on COVID. So in some way, this pandemic is turning all the startups toward itself. So we are working a lot of in COVID solutions. But I would like to highlight that a lot of startups are doing a lot of things without expecting a reward for that, and like printing masks and so forth. A lot of communities working together in for instance, how to help a neighbor. You know, there are platforms in which you share your bill, your utility bill, and a lot of and other people can pay that for you. So, well, there are a lot of initiatives that are yes, are making us to realize how important, or that we are all humans, and we are full of helping forces that can solve other people problems, you know.
Yeah, I can't comment for the whole startup community, and I would say not just the startup ecosystem, but if you look around public, private, nonprofit, kind of regionally in the entire kind of Kansas City MSA, I think you've seen a lot of things that traditionally haven't been done, right? And a lot of kind of ways of people identifying a problem and coming up with a solution if nobody else was doing it, right? So I'll just start listing things. For example, I'm in the growth accelerator group at Black and Beach, and so the corporate level innovation group adjusted and changed their accelerator to look at COVID response, and specifically how can you take things and accelerate them where we have expertise or where we have strong relationships. And so in about 5 weeks, we got about 250 applications from all over the world. Some of them local, some of them, literally from everywhere, and have been able to accelerate some of those initiatives. There have been things like PPE organization and drives where folks are both making, sourcing, delivering, and donating kind of PPE to various parts, initially for kind of the primary health systems, but then for supporting and kind of emergency services and retirement homes and kind of other pieces of kind of the front line community. There are things that have popped up like Curbside KC, which is essentially a site that allowed all the restaurants to list who's delivering, how do you get at it, and very clearly kind of give a channel for, I want to get food and I want to buy it locally. What are my options, right? And they answered that like organically in a clean way without much organization. The entire maker community is collaborating in a pretty interesting and kind of hybrid way where there's sort of a central marketplace, really, kind of what's the demand, what's the supply, what should we print, how should we print it, what's acceptable, face shields, masks, any number of different things. And then there's a bunch of other, there's kind of regional considerations. To Andre's point earlier, kind of that organic, kind of volunteeristic network, right? Who are the first 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 people you would call if you had to solve a problem, right? Everybody's got that, right? And all of a sudden, like a weekend, everybody is like, okay, we got problems. And all of a sudden, all kinds of calls and texts and other things started to come across. And, I see a very small piece of that. There's a lot more than I'm not talking about, right? But I think like when you go look and see kind of what materialized, what was cool is organizations of various sorts and kind of people in various groups and configurations started to identify this is an issue and here's how we can make kind of a meaningful change towards some kind of better outcome. And I think that's kind of become an ongoing conversation. It'll be cool to see it be more kind of coordinated, and obviously more information, more insight, better markets allow us to create kind of better value, right? But I think it's cool that people aren't waiting for perfect to get to a place where they can make meaningful change. And I think Kansas City is full of stories, and I'm only kind of scratching at the surface of some of them.
Yeah, yes, of course. It's clear.
Other questions?
I have one. Andres, I would love to hear more about the impact of your time in Kansas City. Well, it doesn't have to necessarily be Kansas City, but just your IVLP program in general. What were some of the most memorable moments you had while in the United States? What do you think the largest impact was? Maybe if you're in communication with anyone still, I just love hearing those stories and would like to know.
Yes. I'm in touch with a lot of people from there, but the mainly from universities. Also, we are in touch between the people who have traveled from different parts of the world. We are trying to create projects together. But what was the thing that it struck really me was that we in general have a different idea of what the United States are. Here we are used to see United States like a country that is very huge, but our main idea is, I think, that is related to the big cities there, New York or Washington or Chicago. Well, I could be there some years ago, but what I learned in going to the Midwest or going to smaller cities is that there is a very interesting ecosystem that maybe is more is very similar to what we are doing here, because is in Kansas is far from the main capital, far from maybe from the political discussions, and it has to focus more on the local problems, on the local community, on the local situations, and we are facing that here because we are a developing country, so we are far from the mainstream discussions. So that was very interesting for me, because we have visited the Mass Accelerator in Boston, for instance, and that is a huge accelerator, but we couldn't connect with people there because they are playing the major leagues. So it's more interesting for me to connect with communities like yours, because you are more open for us. I have learned a lot of things there. People is more warm. People is more prone to share their knowledge. So that was very interesting for me, because I had been to United States several times, but only before going to Kansas or to Dallas, I had been to the big cities there. There is a complete different image I have I have from the smaller cities compared to the bigger ones. So that is very interesting, because sometimes it seems that there are two countries within the same name,
Yeah, that makes total sense. I really appreciate your perspective on it, and I really liked what you said at one point when what you need to do and what you need to focus on for your own interests and your own community is focus on the community needs. And I really like the concept of sometimes you do need a global perspective to solve community problems, right? And this way that communities can work with one another to help each other, right? And it's these communities that are built up through more of like a global conversation. And so I just really appreciate your perspective, and it's been really interesting to hear everything you have to say. So thanks so much.
And did you have a question? You're still muted.
Okay, now I'm not. I had wondered how things in Argentina are, if they've opened up in your community, like if they've allowed you to meet in groups anymore. Because in Kansas City, we're starting to see that we're allowed to maybe on Monday have a group of 10. So I just wondered how that was going in your country.
No. Yes, that's good point. I hope we are getting in that stage next week. But up to now, we are not allowed to gather with other people, and there are only few activities that are allowed, like all those related to food, to health system, to some another stuff, but most of the people is enclosed, really enclosed, and we cannot gather up to now. So I think that next week, for instance, maybe we are going to be permitted to run in our neighborhood for 1 hour, I think, But right now we are not allowed to do that. So it's a very strict lockdown, and the government in the last 2 weeks has freed some activities, but very few ones. So only in the last fortnight, the banks started to operate again, for instance. So it's very slow here, the way we are getting out of this lockdown. So we have good numbers. I think you know that we are very good from this standpoint, but well, it's very slow, all the release project here.
Well, we are coming up quickly on the end of the hour, so I want to be conscious of everyone's time. I don't know who has other meetings to run off to. But on behalf of Global Ties KC, thank you, Andres and Ilya, both for being here and speaking with us today, and for everyone who's able to join us. These have been really fun. So we've moved these events Global Spokes as a bi-weekly event. So our next one will be on May 21st. But realizing the value in connecting face-to-face with people across the globe and talking about kind of what's going on in our different communities. So thank you both. And if anyone has any last questions, I don't know if you want to stay around for a couple more minutes. You're welcome to do that. Otherwise, thank you, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you for this meeting. I really have enjoyed it, and thanks for hosting me. And well, I really hope to be in touch with you in the near term again.
You should look in and say hi.
I enjoyed the time. Thank you.
And if there's anyone else specifically you'd like to connect with in Kansas City, definitely let us know. We're happy to continue making those connections.
Thank you.
It looks like Jim is saying hi.
Hi, thanks so much. It was great. Really nice to see you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Same
Take care.
for me. Take care. Stay healthy.